Everybody, Jeremy Dickinson here. Thanks for watching. So in this video I want to continue my discussion of the 17th century British philosopher John Locke. And in particular what I want to do is begin talking about where I left off in my previous video on Locke. I want to begin talking about this idea of there being a vertical contract that is made when citizens, subjects form a political society. So we talked about there being also a horizontal agreement. So when we get the justifications, right, we have them ready in place, we exit a state of nature to form a political society, and the subjects, they consent in various ways. And one of the crucial ways that they provide consent is by agreeing to surrender some of the key rights they had while they were in a state of nature. They surrender those rights to a sovereign. So they, in this way, transfer power that they had in state of nature to a sovereign to rule. And that's going to provide the basis of political society. So it's a consent-based view of political authority, ultimately. So we have these justifications, which then pave the way, ultimately, for justifying political authority. But here's how Locke thinks it happens. We have the justifications in place, we form political society, we exit the state of nature, and when we form a political society, what we do is we form these original contracts. And the original contract is in part, or the first original contract is people agreeing to be ruled by a sovereign. What that amounts to is sacrificing, surrendering some of what you had in a state of nature. So this is a consent-based view of political authority, social contract theory of political authority. So in this way, Locke and Hobbes are equal with each other. They're both social contract theorists. The consent of the governed is ultimately what establishes political authority. Okay, so there's that horizontal kind of agreement, but there's also a vertical agreement on Locke's view. This is a key difference between Locke and Hobbes on the original contracts that are established to form political society. Hobbes thinks there's no such vertical contract. Locke thinks that there has to be. He doesn't argue directly against Hobbes, but he just claims that there has to be one. And this is going to ensure the political right to revolution, right, when a sovereign becomes tyrannical. Okay, so on Hobbes' view, the sovereign can't become tyrannical. The sovereign can compromise the well-being of the citizenry, which could lead to a civil war. That can happen. That's different from saying that people have a political right to revolt. Locke is saying people do have that political right to revolt, and it's established by this vertical contract. So if there's a contract binding between the citizens and the sovereign, that means that the sovereign's power is not absolute. And thus, it's possible for the sovereign to be tyrannical. And it's tyrannical when the sovereign does not live up to the terms and conditions of the contract that's made between the sovereign and the citizens. Okay? So that's a very, very important difference. Okay? So we've seen now then Locke developed this idea of a state of nature, just as Hobbes had done before him. Locke gives us a series of arguments that provide justification for exiting the state of nature to form a political society. And then, once we get out of the state of nature, there are these contracts that we make for Locke, both horizontal and vertical, that then establish in a consent-based way the authority of the government and the basis for the obligations that the citizens have to obey the rule of law. So that's been sort of the general sort of structure. Now what's crucial is, remember, Locke gives us several arguments, several justifications for exiting the state of nature to form a political society. One, remember, the first one involved thinking about how we're likely to be too partial in a state of nature, enforcing the laws of nature. We're going to end up needing to have our property rights. That was the third consideration. We're going to end up needing our property rights protected. So we're better off in a political society than, compared to being in a state of nature on this regard. Remember the second consideration, I'm working out of order here a little bit, the second consideration involved thinking about the fact that you can have a state of war in both the state of nature and a political society, and it's likely that states of war are going to be worse in a state of nature compared to a political society. So those are the three general justifications that give us the justification for getting out of the state of nature. Okay, and then the contracts are made, and we're off to the races. We have a political society formed, right? And that political society is going to continue to exist until, right, there you have a tyrannical government, tyrannical sovereign, who can then be overthrown. If a successful revolution occurs, if a successful revolution occurs, right, then we start all over. Okay, let's keep in mind two of the justifications, the one involving partiality and the one involving property. They depend on the linchpin argument that I wanted to return back to, which involves, remember, the prince and the foreigner. So the prince-foreigner argument establishes that the laws of nature are externally binding. They're humanly enforceable in a state of nature. And remember, the argument established that everyone has the authority to enforce the laws of nature in the state of nature. That amounts to, of course, is when people violate the laws of nature, everyone has the right to punish. In accordance, on Locke's view, in accordance with principles of justice, principles of proportionality. So the punishment's got to fit the crime, whether you're in a state of nature or a political society. So Locke, in the Second Treatise of Government, gives us a very, very sketched out view of a theory of punishment. And the theory of punishment is in accordance with how we ordinarily think about punishment. If you commit a severe crime, you deserve a severe punishment. If you commit an unsevere crime, a crime that's not very severe, then your punishment is to be very severe. And of course, then there's a range of other crime punishment relationships, but there's got to be proportionality governing how it is that we punish in accordance with calm reasoning about what the punishment should be, etc. So everyone, again, has the authority to enforce the laws of nature and state of nature, and he used the prince-foreigner argument to establish this. And remember, the argument was just straightforwardly one, or I won't put in terms of numbers here, I'll just lay it out. Since the prince has the authority to punish foreigners who violate the laws of nature within his or its political jurisdiction, then everyone, given everyone's equal in a state of nature, no one's superior to anybody else in a state of nature, everyone has the authority to enforce the laws of nature in a state of nature. Okay? So that's the sketch of the argument, and I wanted to return to it because there might be something in it that gives us pause, that gives us reason to think that maybe something didn't go quite right in it. And remember, the argument is crucial to the justifications for exiting the state of nature. So this argument actually is what I call it the linchpin argument. It's very, very important for Locke. It may not be, decisive because he has a state of war consideration that might be enough to justify leaving the state of nature to form political societies. But at least the other two justifications that were on offer depend on this prince-foreigner argument. So to think about this argument in terms of evaluating it, think about maybe what Hobbes would say to it. So remember, Hobbes and Locke, they're both social contract theorists, so they are in some sense kin when it comes to the foundations of political philosophy. Now, they arrive at different conclusions, but they both believe in the consent of the governed, which is what establishes political authority. Now, suppose Hobbes, who was living obviously in the generations prior to Locke, suppose Hobbes was, privy to Locke's prince-foreigner argument. What would he say? If you want, you can pause the video to think about what you think Hobbes would say about this. Put yourselves in Hobbes' shoes. Okay, so let's go ahead. Maybe hopefully you pause. If not, I'll just move on. Hobbes would say, wouldn't he, that it's false to say that the prince can punish the foreigner. Okay, he'd say that it's false, right? Because punishment, on Hobbes' view, and he thinks that Locke would agree with this, is a political idea. So Locke, he seems to be thinking that, the reader of his book, maybe other political philosophers, maybe other philosophers, but people who are going to read his book are going to go, of course, it's natural to think that a prince can punish a foreigner in these circumstances. The foreigner is within the jurisdiction of the authority of the prince. He does damage in some way, maybe harm someone. Why can't the prince punish the foreigner in those kinds of circumstances? Well, it's a very natural thing to think. Hobbes is though going to say, look, we started developing a theory of political authority, right, in a new kind of way. We wanted to establish a view that had it that what justifies punishment, at least in part, right? I mean, there's broader work that's being done here, but in part what's going on is when you have a view like social contract theory, which says the consent of the government is what establishes political authority, you're providing an account of what justifies punishment. And what justifies punishment is the fact that you've already consented to it as a citizen, right, in advance. Because you're saying, I surrender my right to everything, right? Like the right that I had in the state of nature, right? So that's Hobbes' view, that you have the right to everything. Or the rights, if you're Locke, just the rights that you had in the state of nature. You're sacrificing a chunk of those when you form political society, right? And you're saying, if you're a social contract theorist, that what establishes the political authority is going to be the fact that there's been this transferring of power up to the sovereign, who gets to do things that you no longer get to because you've transferred, by way of your consent, your authority to a sovereign. And if you violate the laws of nature as part of the social contract, then you're to be punished. Anyone's to be punished, really. It's what you're consenting to. Anyone's to be punished, right, by a sovereign if they violate the laws of nature. Okay? And so this seems like maybe kind of a more enlightened way of developing political authority, a more enlightened way of establishing what justifies punishment is the fact that it's already been consented to in advance. So this kind of takes the coercion factor out. It takes the force factor out because you've consented to it in some sense by forming a political society. So princes can punish, let's get back to the prince-foreigner argument, the prince can punish the foreigner only if the foreigner's consented to the rule of the prince. But the foreigner is outside of the political jurisdiction, isn't he, of the political society, of the prince. So it doesn't look like, if you're thinking about what Hobbes would say in response to Locke, it doesn't look like the prince has the authority to punish the foreigner. The consent was never established. And you can't say that the foreigner, by entering the geographical boundaries of the political society, has consented to the rule of the prince. You can't say that. And mostly the reason why you can't say that is because Locke needs this individual member in the argument to be a foreigner. That's crucial to establishing the state of nature relationship that holds between them. So if Hobbes and Locke were both to say something like, or if Locke were to try to say, set aside the Hobbes for a minute, if Locke were to try to say, look, he becomes a citizen or becomes subject to the prince's rule once he enters the geographical boundaries of the jurisdiction of the prince, then this foreigner is no longer a foreigner. He's a citizen, isn't he? So Locke needs this individual to be a foreigner. That means he needs there to be a state-nature relationship holding between the prince and the foreigner. And that's where an issue then arises. The issue arises, look, if the foreigner never consented to the rule of law, never consented to the rules of the political society, then he's not subject to the punishment that comes from violating the laws of nature. Now, on Hobbes's view, it's certainly going to be possible for the prince to do something that looks like punishment to the foreigner, because the prince can use the means of war to his advantage according to the laws of nature. But Locke, he can't say that. Okay, so put a question mark next to the prince-foreigner argument. This is just sort of an evaluation of a very, very important linchpin argument that's responsible for giving us key justifications for exiting the state of nature that we find in Locke. Okay, and remember, just to summarize, the key response to the prince-foreigner argument, the Hobbesian response, if we put it that way, is just that the prince doesn't have, given social contract theory, the right to punish the foreigner. Okay, so this concludes my discussion of Locke and his general philosophical worldview and his theory of human nature in the context of discussing his theory of political philosophy. Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye-bye.